welcome. Today over here, we are going to be discussing what net zero means in residential. And I thought this was a very interesting topic because Brigade itself has taken this very lofty goal to be net zero carbon emissions by 2045. It's something I'm very proud of, but it's also a huge, huge endeavor that touches all of us in intricate ways in which our process is going to be changing. What does net zero really mean in a residential space? Because it's very commonly used in the built space, but also in the built commercial space. So in those kind of buildings, it's a lot easier to kind of tell what the benefits might be or to actually see the financial impact. But in residential, I think it's an interesting conversation that needs to be had. And really, how are we going to be doing it? So shortly, Brigade is also planning to launch our first ever net zero project in residential. I wanted to actually use that experience. Ajay is from our design team. He's the head of design. And we have worked with Karthik of Smarter Dharma to design this project. And Vikram, who is the head and president of Bangalore Apartments Federation, will represent sort of our consumer viewpoint. And I thought this would be a great way to really understand, yes, we're doing net zero, but is that what people want? People who actually live in our buildings, is that what they want? So I'd love to keep the conversation pretty free-flowing. So to get started, I will let each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we can get going.
My name is Ajay Koshy. I head the design function for Brigade Group. I've been with Brigade for a little over 16 years now. I'm happy to be here.
My name is Vikram Rai. I'm today here representing Bangalore Apartments Federation, or BAF in short, which most people know it as. It's a collective of residential welfare association communities across the city. Close to about 1,300 communities are part of that collective. Each of us have our own professional life. So I run a healthcare venture, but in BF, I think we are all contributing towards building consciousness, awareness, and in some sense, action towards being good, ideal citizens. So that's what we're doing. But yeah, we are the part of the residential community.
Sorry, if I can interject, Vikram is also a resident at a Brigade property. So I thought, I don't know if it's appropriate that I mention it, but I'll just make it part of the conversation.
Oldest customers, 20 years to this year now, right, of Brigade Millennium. So yeah. Good.
You are a consumer as well.
Yes, thanks.
My name is Karthik Ponnapa. I co-founded Smarter Dharma along with a couple of very good friends of mine. And the core of Smarter Dharma itself was to see whether we can look at behavior change being part of the solution on climate change and sustainability. Internalizing our own activations towards being more sustainable, being more conscious, towards consumption, towards resource management, and which otherwise would become resource conflict, right? So we are at the stage where we're trying to see whether we can mitigate about 1 billion tons of carbon by 2030. And it's a strong, aggressive goal, but I think we'll get there as a community, as an ecosystem. That's what we're aiming for.
Great. Thank you for the introductions. So I had mentioned that Brigade has committed to net zero by 2045. At an organization level, this is, I think, one of the most challenging things that we're going to be doing. While our day-to-day business is anyway a challenging one, it's basically reimagining almost everything that we do through the lens of net zero, even in terms of what we measure at site, how we communicate this to others, but most important of all, how are we bringing this into the design? Because what we are designing today is what we will build over the course of the next few years, and it's what our residents and tenants and people who come to our hotels will all be using this space over those next few years, still on that journey towards 2045 being net zero. So what is it going to mean in terms of a residential project? So I know we're using all these big terms, but I thought maybe if I can start with you, Karthik, in terms of this word net zero, everyone seems to have aligned to it, but really what does it mean for, say, a residential customer, one of the people living in our communities? how are they supposed to understand what this means for them?
Okay. Actually, not only net zero, Pavitra, but the word sustainability is all encompassing, and not everybody really understands it to
We
its
know it's
fullest.
good,
We know it's good, right?
but we don't know how to make it
Exactly.
really
right?
translatable.
So essentially, look at it this way, right? That sustainability is a spectrum, right? There are many solutions, and all of them can be correct, but it's in a spectrum of goodness or rightness, like you say, right? And net zero is a goal within that spectrum of your sustainability, of being conscious with respect to how we want to consume. So the output of how we make any project or design a project to become net zero should ideally be provided as a benefit to whoever's utilizing the property. And it's great that you're doing it, because the built environment lasts for a minimum of 50 to 55 years, right? So the whole life cycle of that building, the way it operates. So any decision that you take to be able to make something net zero is going to reflect on the performance of that building for the next 50 to 55 years, which means that your entire team, whoever is going to be living, playing, and utilizing all your spaces. I know today we're talking only residential, but even if it's commercial, hospitality, whatever it is, it's going to be utilized. So every year's utilization, what you're doing is you're making sure that it demands for the least amount of resources without making it inconvenient or reducing the comfort factor, right? So you directly then jump into not only an efficiency conversation, but wellness and health that you are giving as an output, right? So let's simplify it, right? If I'm talking about net zero, ideally it is a conversation completely focused on how much energy is being used to make, design, and put something forward, right? Whether I'm going to make a certain amount of concrete, cement, steel, or any of the internal finishes, I'm using energy, right? I'm using electricity. And the output of that is in GHG gases, right? Global warming that we are talking about. So can I first aim at mitigation and reduction of energy demand? And then, of course, the balance which is there, we offset it through various measures that are there. But the delivery, for example, if you're going to design a building really well, right? And this is the critical part. Design the building really well so that, say, you have good cross ventilation. You have good daylight coming in, right? Not allowing the heat to come in. What happens to a consumer? The consumer does not have to turn on their ACs and HVAC and cooling solutions, so the electricity bills don't go up. So by designing your building really well, you are directly providing for better comfort to any consumer. Same thing with water, same thing with materials, same thing with resources. The logic and the way you design this provides so that your end consumer does not get inconvenienced, has a good comfort, but at the same time, understand that they're living in a place which by design allows them to be more responsible.
Great.
Yeah, I've also got a point to add. See, I think why the question is, why do we have to go net zero? What is the reason for that? So I think everyone probably agrees that climate change is something that's real. It's happening. Everyone's experiencing it. And worldwide, about 35% of greenhouse gas emissions is due to the construction industry. It's due to real estate. In India alone, it's about more than 25%. Right? So Brigade has probably realized that from an early stage. And that's why most of our buildings, we try to be as energy efficient and as sustainable as possible. Now we've gone one step further, or many steps further, and saying, let's now attempt net zero. Let's try and reduce the carbon footprint in a few of our buildings. And one such building is what Pavitra was talking about. So it's important for us to understand why we want to go net zero, because real estate is one of the major contributors for greenhouse gas emissions.
I was actually wondering, I guess maybe because I spend a lot of time with our sales and marketing teams, how are these teams going to really get this message through to the customer? Yes, everyone, again, wants to reduce the impact on the climate, but in Indian cities today, the topic tends to be more about, yes, the quality of air, but also basics like just availability of water. How can you translate net zero to availability of water, or maybe having too much dependency on tanker water? I feel like those two, being able to address both is the right thing to do, but how do you connect them? And when you were working with us in trying to create this net zero project, like how were you able to tie the two together, and how should we be having those conversations with our customers?
Good point. In fact, there's a lot of conversation that is currently going on, not only in Bangalore and India, but across the globe, on why communication is as equally important as the implementation of the solutions, and because it's a conversation on awareness, on education, and internalization at the end of the day, right? So, for example, we can design the best and most sustainable homes, but at the same time, if the consumer is not aware and continues to live in their conventional practice, right, they're still demanding for more energy, for more water, their bills are going to be much higher, etc. Now, when we're talking about how to communicate to our consumers, I think it is about allowing them to understand the value. See, I think all of us are inherently sustainable. We understand the importance of it, right? It's just about being able to connect A to B to C, which we are not able to do. Like we were just talking earlier about how do we talk about operational carbon and embodied carbon. These are not layman conversations, right? But if I can show them that by looking at and being and staying in one of the Brigade properties that is there, you're going to have a much better surrounding, which will give you health, well-being, security, right? At the same time, can you also provide financial benefit structures? Because by living here, you actually have the potential to reduce your demand for resources, which means to say your energy consumption, demand for energy is going to go down. The demand for water that you're utilizing will go down. Last year was a good educator to all of us in Bangalore, right? That we had a huge water problem. Till then, we all assumed that if I turn on the tap, I will get water. Last year, we learned that that is not possible anymore, right? So it's about how we internalize this. Today, we understand the importance of water. That is going to relate to how energy is going to be played out with. So that is a really good thing to do.
So I guess we will have to talk a bit about how we are putting in measures to reduce the amount of water that is first of all being used, and then how much we can actually recycle that on site in our communities to basically reduce the load that is required to come in from tankers in many of our communities where there's no pipeline that is installed by, say, the municipal authorities. So we can come back to that. But Vikram, since you represent so many of our communities here in Bangalore, and I think in the past we've also talked about how other cities also fare on this front. Where do you think the general consumer mindset is in terms of net zero per se? Is that a term that that's going to resonate with the consumer at large, or what is it that we need to do to educate them, or maybe reduce the gap between the intent and the desire to actually be in a net zero space?
I'll borrow a couple of points which both KP and Ajay made, right? One is, of course, the concept of net zero itself is, my belief at this point of time, fairly 30,000 feet from a consumer's point of view, right? It's at best considered something very esoteric. Not many people understand what it is at all. And it's almost like, what does it mean to me and how does it mean to me in a day-to-day life, right? So that disconnect is there. We have to be able to bridge that gap. But how do we do it is probably a step-by-step process. I think to begin with, a couple of trends that is very important to note, which I think is beginning to impact the consumers already. Both residents who are already there in existing residential apartments, as well as potentially people who will be buying in and staying, would be twofold, which is where I think what Ajay mentioned in terms of what people are looking at in terms of visible impact of climate change is today reasonably catching on, right? It's no longer a concept, right? I think year on year, because we are experiencing extreme climate events. This year, Bangalore, I was surprised, I think has rains for 10 months in every year, right? One of the longest season of rains in any cities across the country. This year we had no rains for 4 months. So which is what created the groundwater challenge, and then it escalated over there. And come November, we'll probably have floods, right?
Probably have floods,
right. So I think the idea of extreme climate events being the result of climate change, which to which people are in some sense contributing daily and it is impacting their daily life, I think is fairly now mainstream. They know that. I think that's one point which we have to be using in the communication towards value consciousness. Part two is, I think, the government's response to that from a compliance, etc. point of view also is stepping up, right? I don't think the governments of today or in the near future will be at the level of being smart enough to plan a climate resilience strategy. Their natural reaction to that will be very regulatory, right? Saying that, okay, you should, if you do this, then you will have, if you don't do this, you will have penalties and things.
And fairly overnight as well.
Overnight, it will come overnight. And that is becoming more and more obvious now. And in the work that we do, we're sort of dealing with every other day, there's a new thing that we deal with basically, right? So compliance is becoming very stricter. Governments respond that way. Compliance costs are going up, right? Penalties towards non-compliance is going up, etc. So, but I can definitely say that, you know, the conversations of today regarding sustainability is not the same which was 15, 20 years back. Now the next phase of the residential boom will essentially have to factor what do we have in terms of resources, supply, water, waste management. Are the buildings and residential communities of today being extremely smart in terms of helping me deal with those issues will be a very important value conversation to do.
I just wanted to add to the point that you said about regulatory. I think we have had a few challenges, but also that's kind of what keeps the job interesting, is that you're trying to meet certain consumer needs that they don't even know they're going to need about, say, 3 to 4 years down the road. And you certainly don't know what sort of regulatory requirements are going to come up. So some of the challenges we have had is trying to gauge how much EV charging we need to put into a project, for example. We have estimated various numbers, but the reality is wildly different from what you would have thought. We estimated something like a 20%. In reality, when people actually had to make that decision, and for a lot of people, making the decision only happens when you have to put money behind it, that became closer to a 5%, but definitely less than double digit. So that was a big learning for us, because we have been looking to make that investment into the infrastructure, and then it is not used to the capacity that we had originally planned for. So that was one thing. The flip side of that is that I think Ajay also can speak to this a bit. The variation in what all different government agencies are asking us to do. So Ajay, maybe on the EV approach that we've been trying to put
it's
together.
an interesting point, because it's always been a challenge for us how much of EV to provide for any particular development. So there's a norm by the Ministry of Urban of Forest, MOEF has got a particular norm. The Pollution Control Board has got a norm. ECBC has got a particular norm. So there's no consistency to how much of EV we need to provide. So there is a kind of mandate by the Pollution Control Board that we need to provide approximately 20% of all vehicles to be EV. But like you mentioned, hardly about 5 or 6% of people have EV vehicles. So that's always been a challenge for us, but we are trying to make sure that we build in the infrastructure or the space. If the need arises, then we have the space and the capability to enhance the power requirements for that.
So Ajay, if I can stay with you a bit, you've been with Brigade for 16 years. Like you said, we've designed a lot of buildings together. This is really the first time we took up this challenge of doing net zero, and we've been looking to find the right project to do that. And for you, what were the big issues you thought would be easy to overcome, and maybe something where it caught you off guard?
I think firstly, it is coming to some sort of a goal that we need to achieve this, and then getting all the various stakeholders together to aim for that goal. We have architects, we have consultants, we have suppliers, contractors, our own sales team. So all of them, getting them all on the same page to align to that particular goal is one of the challenges that we had. Once we have that goal and that kind of where we want to aim, it becomes much simpler for us to try and achieve that goal. Comes to a particular goal, it's all about energy, it's about water management, it's about waste management. And once we know where we need to go, it becomes easier for all these various stakeholders to come together and kind of aim for that. So that was the primary challenge that we had in the beginning.
So when we looked at that, and I think Karthik would also have some points to say about that. There were quite a few measures that we wanted to put in to net zero, or to this particular net zero building, that would have helped us get to that level in terms of the numbers and how much emissions the project would generate. And we wanted to, as you said, reduce that number in terms of how much the emissions generated would be. Correct. So that you can offset less. And the offsetting is also a financial decision that impacts not just our customers, but also us as Brigade, because now we are taking the decision to offset on behalf of the residential community. So there were there a couple of, well, I know there were, so I'm kind of feeding that question to you. There were a couple of situations where we decided not to go ahead. The STP was one of them, and I'm raising it because I think it's like a real challenge today, because you want to do a certain type of technology, you want to use a certain type of technology, but from a developer perspective, there's a different risk that we're undertaking here. It's you're deciding to put in some technology that your customer may not want at all, and then come back to the developer and say, hey, I don't like this at all, you need to go back and redo. And at that point, maybe it's not possible to redo. So maybe if you could talk a bit about the challenges we had on that front.
Yeah. Because when you design a building, right, it's for such a long period of time, you really do not know 10 years down into future what it's going to look like. What is the demand going to be, say, 15 to 20 years down? But you have to plan for it today. Right. That is where that gray area comes in for us, where whether it is from policy or whether it is from a regulation, whether it is from a customer demand or whether it is from reality. Right? There might not be water available from external sources like tanker, etc., maybe 20 years from now. You have to be able to visualize and plan for it and be ready for it, right? But that you have to do today, which is the really tough thing, isn't it? So the approach that we actually took for this very specific project was actually twofold. Right? One is because we are not able to visualize what that future could be. Can I be as prepared as possible? Which means to say that, can I have basic infrastructure ready so that it will be future ready for tomorrow and for whenever there's a need, right? You do not have to go ahead and implement all of the solutions, but be ready to be able to modularly accept those solutions when the time arises that it has to be fitted in, right? So that's where design becomes very, very important. And the second piece is, of course, the type of solution, right? See, you will be able to have a whole variety of solutions for any particular challenge that you have. The approach is what really matters, right? If you're going to be sticking on to saying that you want to make it as sustainable, or I'm going to change that terminology to say as benefiting to the community who's going to live there, then I have to start thinking like that consumer, right? Consumer is going to ask for some very simple requirements at the end of the day. Please make sure that it does not inconvenience me. I should see that there's an upfront value that I am able to get from this particular solution. So can I actually set up an STP which works naturally, which doesn't have any moving parts so that you don't need very high maintenance, right? Can I use gravity to actually move water rather than pumps? Because all of this demands for energy, machinery, equipment, etc. Right? So for the next 50 years, I either do very high maintenance if I put in a conventional STP, or I think differently and put a completely natural movement of water STP which gets treated. So it's these decisions that allow us to kind of look at the future and say, okay, can we do this, right? For this project, for example, we also are looking at saying, listen, what happens tomorrow if I don't get any fresh water from outside, whether it is tanker or borewell or whatever? That means I have to start thinking about recycling. Today, recycling is, I think it's a solved solution from a technology perspective, but it is a very highly unsolved issue from a social stigma that I have to treat my water and consume it. Though everybody wants to become Singapore, right?
Except for this point.
Except for this point. So I think in those areas, getting your infrastructure ready so that tomorrow it can be modularly fitted in becomes the best thing that we can do at this point.
Yeah.
So that's how we've approached this very specific project, saying that, listen, in some places, nobody really understands what's required 20 years from now. Let's plan for it, right? And in other places where we know that it's going to come up, but today it's not required, let's design in such a way that when tomorrow something is needed, it can be just fitted like a Lego block, right? And then things operate and function. So that's the approach that we get in.
I'll tell you an interesting challenge that we came across while debating this STP issue.
Yes.
So the requirement for STP, the space requirements are very, very large. So it is a balance between that and providing additional amenities to the customer, right? And so it's always a balance of what we need to provide for the customer and what we need to provide to make it net zero. And that the conversation kind of helped us make the decision not to go for this particular type of STP. But like you mentioned, the STP that we're doing now, keep it future ready for ultrafiltration, so that when a customer later wants to use it, recycling for his bathing purposes, that flexibility has been built.
Yeah, just to chime in, my assumption right now is that I think technologies in this space also are developing at a faster pace than anything else earlier. So which means it will allow you to be modular as much as possible, much better than earlier. Is that a fair statement to make, basically? Sure. So I think that's a great thing, right?
There's actually a lot where both developers and our consumers, so, you know, the apartment communities that you're representing as well, there's so much to be gained by sort of aligning together and approaching any other stakeholder, whether it's the government or whether mutually approaching this goal of sustainability or net zero. What is your word of advice to maybe developers who have the right intent? What is the better way to sort of collaborate or maybe align with communities and get our point across so that we're actually doing this together, not just for environment, etc., but so that we have better bargaining power with the authorities who are really sort of controlling the decisions behind the scenes on a lot of this?
No, I think it is inevitable, Pavitra. We have to move in that direction. About a couple of years back, we started working with CREDAI as a body, which was a big step for us. You know, in our community, what was the kind of comments is like, you're working with the builders kind of stuff. There's a big taboo, basically, right? But I mean, that's how it is. But we went ahead and said that, hey, you know, they are the most, you are all the most critical stakeholders in the most expensive product that we are buying in our lifetime kind of stuff, right? So you have to take that challenge head on. Now, I think more and more we are collaborating with CREDAI to government also on certain things, right? It makes sense to come together. We lean on CREDAI's arm, they come to us as well. I think that collaboration has to be done, at least at broader ranges of matters like this, right? Tougher conversations like sustainability, net zero, how to bring in a certain degree of environmental viability to projects while costs and price has to be consumer expectations are matched, has to be so it has to be an ecosystem approach. Just to take the example of your STP type. Now, imagine if there is a certain degree of collaboration between the builder community and communities like us to establish case studies to say that, hey, certain technologies have worked, this is what is the thing. If that education and awareness translates to newer buyers, I'm sure they'll be much more aware and trusting a decision of making an eco STP. And they will trust the decision also that if it doesn't work in some time, it can be replaced. It's a matter of just believing and knowing that, you know, technologies can change, efficiencies can change. The environment under which you are using the technology itself can change. I mean, 8 to 10 years is a long time. I think we'll have to build that conversation. Like in one of the ideas which we have not yet executed with CREDAI was to create a sort of a consumer awareness book, right? Where everybody, when they come together, right? When they buy an apartment, has enough information where people like us who have lived for 10, 15 years are saying that, hey, this is what, and we are sort of contributing to the messaging to them, saying that when you're buying a new house, these are the things that you should also think about and not just features, was an ecosystem level play. We have to do more of those things and then there are, of course, a lot of people who are newer buyers, second time buyers, right? Obviously, the second time buyers will be much more aware, having lived and gone through that. So I think the buyer market will also mature over a period of time. But if the ecosystem also comes together, right? As the buyer matures, that's where we, but I think Bangalore is much better in terms of talking the sustainability language than probably any other city.
I think Ajay,
I think
you
they're
would know
much
that,
they're much
so-
more conscious about this.
Yeah.
They're much more aware of this, and we are confident that this project that we're doing, there'll be a lot of demand for this project. You're right. I mean, because of the kind of population in Bangalore, the people are much more conscious and aware of this.
Yeah, I can guarantee you that in our peer-to-peer conversations, we're very proud of the fact that the culture and the nature of the people in Bangalore as opposed to any other cities is distinctively different, which is a little bit more modern in terms of their approach, right? Which is, I think, a good thing, right? To be able to push the boundary on these conversations.
Yeah, I think at the end of it, when you're trying to be environmental friendly, you want to be net zero. It's all about having proper cross ventilation, having insulated walls, managing your water, making sure that you have less and less dependence on outside sources for water. So at the end of it, when the customers understand that this project that we're doing is going to improve the quality of life, that's when I think the acceptance will be
I
more.
think there's one thing we take away from this panel, and these kinds of discussions are sometimes catalysts for something bigger, is that there is an opportunity to align as a business and then also with the community, and maybe, lobby the government and municipal authorities for basically better decision making and better planning. Because one thing anyone who has grown up or maybe moved here and loves this city realizes that the only thing holding it back is better planning as a city. So before I really open it up for any questions, since we are getting close to out of time, I just thought I'd ask you guys, since we are still in the business of building buildings, what is the one sustainable feature you think every project should have, every residential community should have? So I'll just throw it straight to you, KP, although I know you probably have 100 of them, but which would be maybe your one or two top?
So what we've seen, Pavitra, traditionally is the most impact with respect to how to design buildings to be more conscious, right, actually comes at your design stage. The highest amount of impact is at that place. Everything else after that is a retrofit. I foresee Brigade spending that much more time, resource, and effort in the design concept. Right? Very frankly, I believe that's where you guys, maybe you'll know it very structuredly, or maybe it's a subconscious thing, but I do believe that you are going in that direction.
Is there one element I need to incorporate in the design in every new building going forward?
Yes, I would say, actually, I'll give you two elements, right? One is empathy. Second is justice. If you are able to actually bring in these two into your design facet on sustainability, it's going to actually be beneficial for all stakeholders, whether it is the builder or whether it is the consumer, whether it is the support staff, whether it is government regulation. To me, these two are the main players of sustainability. And to me, these two are the pieces which, when you start putting into your systems, is going to change the way you think of planning, design, city building, the whole concept.
Great. But I'm going to give these guys an out and say that I was thinking you will say something like STP or solar heating, so that now they can say that.
Yes.
That was like the ultimate answer. But now maybe if there's something technical or some other aspect.
No, I
of it.
think, that's a very high
I-
level.
So I'll try and kind of connect that, right, to STP, right? When we're talking
Empathy
about
and justice.
when we're talking about empathy, right, it's water availability, right? Not only to the building and society, but the ecosystem and surrounding area, right? If I'm able to understand the importance of water, right, I will be able to bring in all the solutions so that I provide water equity to the entire ecosystem I'm constructing this building in, right? Then it doesn't become just a conversation of eco-STP or no eco-STP. It becomes of how can I regenerate water for my entire society and for my ecosystem. That is what I mean by bringing this focus onto this. Right? So I'll connect that. Everything can be connected. It's actually pretty easy, and you guys know it.
Yeah.
Right? So it happens. Right? We all know, I mean, we read a newspaper or wherever, right? The EWS or the lower strata of society pays as much as 20 to 200 times more for water, which is not equitable if you really think about it. By actually looking at how you are moving and sharing and playing with water, it allows you to take those decisions.
He explained actually a point that I was going towards. I think from a very near to midterm point of view, to look at building certain degrees of efficiency, circular efficiencies on water, I think will be the most critical challenge to bridge, because I expect that in the next 20 to 30 years, that will be an element which, I mean, water wars aside, but I think there will be real challenges to solve for. People's biggest sense of kind of value expectations in an growing urban ecosystem will be around the fundamental element of water. So as much as possible of sort of thought process and thought leadership investment into saying that how do residential communities become as circularly sustainable as possible as far as water is concerned, including the point of what you mentioned, right? At the end of the day, it should not be at the cost of outside the ecosystem being deficient and then only we are sufficient. I mean, in BF, we are trying to be more and more conscious, saying that we are, each of our communities, I mean, and residents live in an interconnected society over there, right? So how does it let them to be good neighbors and responsible citizens outside their thing also matters at the end of the day. So I think, yeah, to build some bit of, I mean, water being the magic sort of to solve for might be worth it.
Ajay, the pressures.
I agree with the fact that water is the most
The water
important thing.
pressures.
But how intelligently and smartly we use this whole concept of saving water is important. Is there some way we can combine water with biodiversity, creating open ponds, creating lakes with also storage, water harvesting, at the same time increases your flora and fauna? Some intelligent, like what we've done here in Gateway, we created a lake, we've done certain lakes or water bodies in Brigade Orchards, we're doing it in other projects, where we use it as rainwater harvesting tanks, which will help us conserve water, but at the same time, attract migratory birds, you build forests around it. So that is something which how we can use this aspect and also enhance the quality of life. Technology, bringing technology, a lot of apartments in Hyderabad and Chennai are air conditioned. How do we bring in new technology, whether chill water systems or whether it's VRV systems, to kind of reduce your power costs? These are all things that can be used, I feel.
Great. Thank you. I wasn't actually sure what to expect from a question like that, but I think the way in which each of you answered it was just very different, but also it's the same underlying desire and fear that we all have, living in at least Bangalore or maybe in these growing Indian cities, that we do know that water is a huge issue, clean air is a huge issue, waste management is a big deal. So maybe at least in our residential communities is the first place where one can start.
Yeah.
And make a radical change from then on. And I also am very grateful that we are in Bangalore, because I do agree with you, Vikram. Bangalore does seem to have one of the most elevated thought processes, at least, and the most aware and conscious citizens. So it does make it a little easier to even talk this talk when you're in this business of building and trying to go green. So I will open it up now for questions if anyone has.
How do we plan for the next 15 years and 20 years when the technology today may not exist? And just saying that it is modular and creating the space for it may not be the most efficient use of the space today, right? So I had some really, I mean, it's nagging at me now, saying how is that problem going to be solved?
Can I take a stab at it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
See, in my mind, I think, and I alluded to that earlier as well, right? I don't think so. The nature of technology being dynamic is a deterrent, right? As long as I think there is greater sense of communication and conversation, that is what it is. I'm talking about building a more outbound approach towards developing consumer trust on that issue, right? Like today in our lived environment, conversations with communities about changing technologies, which is inefficient and not suiting today's needs. It's a tough conversation, but it's a doable conversation, right? Where people are I mean, as recent as 4-5 year old apartment complexes can have the conversation saying that, hey, something which was installed was probably not the right thing. Can we then replace that, right? I think people are getting more and more aware that, the needs of technologies can change. So my recommendation would be that, don't be distracted by the fact that if the technologies can change, what should I do and should I not do it at all, right? I think to take the benefit of risk and do something, right, which then will, it might not be relevant 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. But I'm saying today the decision taken should be to do it, right? I think, as I'm saying, the consumer ecosystem, the market will evolve to appreciate that, because like I said, climate change is real, events are real, and action on that has to be real at the end of the day. We cannot anymore afford to not take that action. So I think as a real estate industry, please err on that side. I can assure you that I think the ecosystem will evolve around supporting you in that direction, basically, right? I mean, all the work that we are doing today, I mean, collaborating with Credai and creating, I mean, use cases, case studies in terms of how people are even in retrofitting solutions, will all come to the rescue, basically, to give a forward-looking communication to saying that we need to be able to do these choices. But I think not taking that choice is not an option.
I think hearing from someone like you say that is actually great, because one of the things that really does hold us back as a developer probably is the fact that, hey, we want to think in this direction, but a lot of the efforts that we put in 5 years time and in 10 years time, because it's also cost input and it's a cost effort that goes into it, may not be utilized. So that actually gives me a little bit of confidence in this approach.
No, I think the cost part of it, and I think there are lots of smart people in this room, there are lots of smart people in the city. To build an economic argument over there is not a challenge, I think so. Like KP mentioned, I think we have to build a behavioral argument first, right? To say that the city that we are staying in today will, if we don't make some fundamental choices today, 10 years down the line, not even 10 years down the line, year on year, there will be impact on your quality of life, is the fundamental argument to make. I think economics will work out around that, basically, right? So, I mean, 5 years back, we thought there won't be an economic argument around water. Today it is there, right? 5 years back, we already made a great economic argument on energy. Today, in our collective network, there are more than 200, nearly 200, 250 of our apartments today, member apartments, have rooftop solar systems. We have more than 25 megawatt of installed capacity, right, including Brigade Gateway, etc., which are leading. It's the largest residential rooftop installation in the entire country, right? Bangalore, right, in the last 5 years, basically. So I think we can push the boundary forward, and for which the whole ecosystem has to come together. Yeah, I mean, does it mean that there is better collaboration on sales conversations happening in this direction, in informing, educating, right? Should we push the government to like BBMP? We were just having a conversation a while back when we were entering, saying that BBMP now has a climate action cell, right? Of course, it's a start, right? They seem to be a little clueless about what that should do, but they are at least coming forward and asking people like this, saying that, can we take your case studies on what has happened in different communities to promote that and talk about it later? At least that's a great start, right? Because more and more people will learn about it. So I do believe that we are in a time and occasion when to be able to be a little bullish on that front is important from all angles.
No, I have to appreciate that actually, because a lot of things don't happen unless someone makes a crazy statement, and then you have to go ahead and keep up to that. So even if it's a bold statement like saying net zero by 2045 for us, or BBMP thinking 2041 itself is quite a big deal. But once you start getting into the nitty-gritty, you realize how much work there is. But you have to keep, and that's been our journey so far as well with the whole net zero approach. How do you take that and break it down into smaller pieces and slow it out across different teams and then measure it and so on? But someone has to take that start of saying, we're going to do it, without which it's not going to happen.
No, absolutely. And well done and congratulations. It's a bold ambition to announce.
I'm just psyching myself up for all the net zero meetings we have to have.
No, absolutely. No, somebody has to put it out there, right? You have to stick your neck out and say that basically, right? So yeah, it starts from there.
Yeah, great.
So just taking the cue from what Ponnapa was talking about on the cost. So my question would be probably from the design point of view to Ajay and Ponnapa, and of course you also can add to it. So while we talk about sustainability and net zero, we also, when we talk these features to the customer, in customer's mind, he's already preparing himself saying that, okay, another feature added, so what kind of additional cost will add to this? So in terms of cost implication, what kind of cost implication would it be? And even if it is cost implication, are there any other ways where we think from the design point of view to cut down this cost and somewhere, counter it? So some views on that would, me being into sales, so this would be a challenge for me to put it across to the customer.
And probably take a stab at it from a cost perspective. One is, how do we bring our energy cost down? The operating cost. One is your sales cost, that you keep it aside. But if you're able to get your operating cost down from a design perspective, the way you orient your buildings, like insulate certain walls which are facing east and west to cut down your solar radiation. You size your windows accordingly. The specifications of your glass are such that your air conditioning costs are lower. So these are things that we can give you to give the sales team some specific data on how your operation costs are lower. We use solar panels to light up your common areas. Again, your operation costs come down. Water demand comes down because we're using special treatment in STPs which you can reuse water. So these are certain things which we can give data to prove to the customer, tell the customer that your operational costs within a 10-year, 5-year, 20-year period comes down. That's one of the things that we could use to convince.
So, I mean, lots of different ways, right? I think the customer understands today, at least, that there is going to be an incremental cost at the beginning. But to me, I think they've reached a stage of understanding that it is more of an investment. Right? There is a ROI, which what you're alluding to as operational expense reduction, and that's a benefit that I get. I think one of the questions which we need to learn how to answer better is the health and well-being question, right? Which I don't think anybody in the industry or ecosystem has been able to crack so far, right? It's the same thing that what even Vikram was talking about. We've learned the economic cost of electricity. Last year we learned the economic cost of water. I'm presuming tomorrow we'll learn the cost of air quality, waste, mobility. Right? There's enough data out there. I mean, coming to WTC would have, how much time would each of us have taken, right? At the end of the day, it's a mobility conversation. It's not about whether I came running or cycling or whether I took the metro or public transportation or private car. It's about getting you to move from point A to point B with certain categories like convenience, time, availability, access, all of those things. Right? So to me, I think this is what is going to be answered. And I think there's an accelerated move to how to answer these as well. People understand that there is a certain value. Being able to understand that value and intrinsically internalize and appreciate is what you are actually asking. How do I help them appreciate the value that I'm going to give to them? Right? And that is that educational communication that we first alluded to.
So I think we'll wrap up here, but I wanted to thank you guys for this conversation. I really wanted to have an authentic discussion about doing net zero, because there are a lot of movements in the world that sort of push companies to take things like net zero because, okay, that's how you get investors, or, there's a lot of capital chasing net zero companies. And one tends to sort of do these things because that's what is expected. Mm-hmm. But I felt, and I think Brigade as an organization has always held those kind of core values seriously. Yes, you're doing this, but also, is it actually going to impact someone at a grassroots level, at a ground level? And that's something we've tried to do regardless of big, wonderful campaigns like Net Zero by 2045. We've always been doing certain sustainable initiatives through our design over the course of the last 38 years. Maybe haven't even talked enough about them. But what we want to do differently this time is talk about them, maybe show that leap of faith, like you're saying, to the end customer and be with them on that journey which is a little different because, hey, I think failure is going to be part of that journey. We're not going to know, and I think that's what I appreciate about the questions that were even asked today. Some of the concerns of an organization that's supposed to be making money and profit out of this is, hey, it's increasing my cost. Hey, I'm worried about failure, or I'm worried about something not working out, or it's going to be too hard. But I think those are the things that make us different or make us want to do this in a different way. It's not just about having a net zero goal, but also being part of that journey and aligning with the rest of the stakeholders, community, government, the environment at large, and how do we do that feeling good about it, not just saying, hey, I'm checking this box on my sustainability report and my BRSR, compliance and so on. So hopefully with that and having had these conversations, I think we have a lot to really think about from how we're going to communicate this. And I think we have the right people in the room as well, from my creative agency and our customer voice and all of that, to really think, how can we do this in the right way?
I have a quick suggestion though. I mean,
Yeah.
you may please. I think a great advantage for brands like yours is the brand equity that you have with your past customers as well, basically, right? I think to be able to take stories of, build sustainability over a period of time with your ex-customers as well, and as a value sell to newer customers is great, right? Because then I think through existing customers' eyes, right, and their lives in the last, like I have been in Brigade Millennium for 20 years, and now through the lens of BAF, I'm able to see also what clearly is the qualitative difference in terms of, say, living in a Brigade or any other comparable sort of category of brands is to somewhere else, basically. So the value for money conversation, the pitch that you can do, I think can be much more richer if there is reflection from the past also of having built communities which are very livable, right?
Yeah.
So some of
Yeah.
those price and cost conversations, I think, can get legitimized by saying that customers have benefited from this over a period of time.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for lending your perspectives.
Thank
and thanks for being a part of Showcase and the panels this year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.